In July 1601, an army of 12,000 Spanish soldiers marched into the misty dunes of Flanders. Their target was a coastal fishing town called Ostend, and they expected to crush it in a matter of weeks. Instead, they walked into a 3-year meat grinder. By the time the siege finally ended, the sands of Ostend would swallow the lives of 40,000 Spanish troops. Ostend was a heavily fortified Dutch enclave sitting deep inside Spanish-controlled territory. For Archduke Albert, who ruled the Spanish Netherlands, it was a dangerous bridgehead that had to be eliminated. This was not a standard siege. The Spanish army was attempting to declare a brutal war on the North Sea tides and the Flemish mud. Take a look at the layout of this fortress. Protected by the sea to the north and tangled marshlands to the south, every approach required crossing deep water. The biggest problem for attackers was the new eastern harbor, known as the Gule. Because the Dutch Republic controlled the sea, their ships could sail right into the city. Meanwhile, the Spanish forces were stuck on the dry dunes, completely unable to block the harbor entrance. This created an unbreakable lifeline. The Dutch Navy ferried food, ammunition, and fresh reinforcements directly to the garrison, keeping the city's strength at maximum capacity. This created a logistical paradox for the Spanish. They had to capture a fortress that they could not starve into submission. Unable to cut the supply line, Archduke Albert responded with artillery. He ordered massive field guns to pound the outer defenses, attempting to smash the sand and stone ramparts into dust. The bombardment took a heavy toll. By late December, winter storms had temporarily blocked the harbor, leaving the Dutch garrison hungry and exhausted. To buy time, the English commander, Francis Vere, faked surrender negotiations to keep the Spanish distracted until supply ships finally arrived. Faster, more urgent to the deception, furious at the deception, the Archduke ordered a retaliatory night assault on January 7. Thousands of Spanish troops waded through the shallow old harbor, only to be suddenly illuminated by flaming rings thrown from the walls. As the attackers bunched up below the ramparts, the Dutch opened the moat's sluice gates. A massive spring tide surged through the approach trenches, drowning 2,000 Spanish soldiers in a matter of minutes. Brute force had failed. The defenders had proven they could kill more men with the tide than the Spanish could with iron. After that disaster, the siege devolved into a miserable stalemate. Disease spread through the overcrowded camps, and relentless cannon fire claimed thousands of lives on both sides. But the Dutch held a massive advantage. Because they lost 1,000 men a month, they used their open harbor to cycle wounded and exhausted troops out, replacing them with fresh recruits to maintain a constant garrison. The attackers were stuck, bleeding out in the freezing, wet dunes, with zero relief. Desperate for a solution, the Spanish welcomed an engineer sent by the Pope, Pompeo Targoni. His task was to build machines that could block the eastern harbor. Targoni built massive rolling gabions, floating artillery platforms, and a 30-meter mobile ramp, nicknamed the Hell Wagon. One by one, they were shattered by Dutch cannons or were washed away by the tides. The reliance on these giant floating machines proved that conventional military tactics had entirely broken down in the face of Ostend's geography. Command of the Spanish forces eventually fell to Ambrogio Spinola, an Italian banker who had learned warfare entirely from his library. Spinola was a pragmatist. He realized the harbor could never be blocked. Instead, he ordered his men to build covered causeways across the wetlands, taking the city meter by meter and accepting the horrific human cost. In the end, the weather finished what the cannons started. In the summer of 1604, violent storms washed away the city's outermost defenses, ramparts the Dutch had desperately constructed out of rubble and the bodies of the fallen. With the terrain finally failing them and the inner walls compromised, the exhausted Dutch garrison surrendered on September 20, 1604. Spinola's cold mathematics won the city, but it proved that overcoming an invincible position required an acceptance of catastrophic human loss. When Archduke Albert entered his long-sought prize, he found a shattered, ghostly ruin, purchased with the blood of 40,000 men. This map shows the true strategic cost. While the Spanish spent 3 years locked in the dunes, the Dutch used their naval access to sail down the coast and capture a brand new inland port called Sluis. Spain nearly bankrupted its army to take a single destroyed town. The Dutch replaced it entirely at a fraction of the cost. The outcome reveals the power of an unbreakable supply line. A defender who can cycle their troops and supplies indefinitely does not need to win every battle. They only need to survive until the attacker has nothing left to spend.